policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Of course, last night was the first night of the Republican National Convention. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the second hour. Have a chance to hear from a number of individuals, some of the clips from Sheriff David Clark and Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And, we'll talk about Melania Trump, too. We'll get into all those issues. And, of course, tonight will be the second night of the Republican National Convention. Each day we will do some analysis and evaluation of what was said and some of the things that happened. Next week, of course, is the Democratic National Convention. But in between, we also want to continue educating you about some very important issues, and this certainly relates to some of the themes even talked about last night at the Republican Convention. This new book, Stand Strong America, Courage, Freedom, and the Hope for Tomorrow. It is written by two individuals, one who's been on the program with us many times before, Dr. Alex McFarland, who is kind of the religion and culture expert, and also the director of Christian Worldview and Apologetics at the Christian Worldview Center at North Greenville University. Also is the host of the program on American Family Radio, Exploring the Word, and author of 17 books, I believe is the latest count, 10 Answers to Skeptics, 21 Questions Your Kids Ask About Christianity, and of course this book, Stand Strong America. Alex, thank you for joining us again here on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, thanks for having me. I have such a world of respect for you, and it's always an honor to be on. I thank you.
Well, and again, we want to also introduce your co-host. For many of you, you may have seen some of the things that they have done together, but for many of the rest of you, you're maybe meeting Jason Jimenez for the first time. He's a pastor, apologist, national speaker. He is the founder of STAND STRONG Ministries. We have a link not only to Alex McFarland's website, but also to standstrongministries.org. He's the author of such books as The Raging War of Ideas, How to Take Back Our Faith, Family, and Country. Also as the co-author with Dr. Norman Geisler of the Bible's Answers to 100 of Life's Biggest Questions. And Jason, thank you so much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby, for having both of us. We appreciate it.
Jason, for just a minute, talk about your program, because I know a number of people may be familiar with it, but at the same time, there may be some that say, Stand Strong Ministries, never heard of it, and some of the media that you do. Can you explain that real quick?
Yeah, we're just real simply is we look at ourselves, Kerby, as reinforcers, and we reinforce biblical truth really primarily in the church. I've been a pastor for 16 years, and in 2012 we started a nonprofit ministry to link arms with a lot of families that are housed in a lot of churches in the nation, but our primary objective is to strengthen their biblical worldview because, as you and I know, sadly, 80% of Christians today in America are biblically illiterate. And so we come alongside pastors, we come alongside the family, and we really try to harness a robust biblical worldview.
Well, Alex, one of the things you talk about in the book in the very beginning is America hangs in the balance. I don't know anybody who speaks in more churches than you do. And so in some respects, even though I have a chance to travel around the country and certainly every day on a talk show get to hear from people, you probably have a better sense of the pulse of America. So as you travel around with an exhausting schedule that I can't even imagine, what are you finding? Are there other Americans concerned about the future of America?
Well, great question. Yeah, people really are concerned. We did a thing called the Malaise Index or the Malaise Survey, and there is even among people that aren't necessarily churchgoers and maybe not God-fearing people necessarily. I think there's just this sense that we're not where we ought to be as a country. That there's some things that are fundamentally wrong. I was on a bus in Washington D.C. a couple of months ago, and I was talking to an individual sitting beside me who described themselves as a lifelong skeptic, a lifelong agnostic. And this lady told me that lately she had begun to pray because she just felt like the culture was in a dark place. And so people understand that something has been lost here in America. Now, Jason and I, in our book and in our travels, and it's our privilege to do a number of things together. We speak together. He's on the road speaking. I'm on the road speaking. But we know the answer is God, that our nation needs to return back to not only humility and repentance before God, a relationship with Christ. For those who don't know the Lord, our number one message is turn to Jesus and be saved. But here in America, we've got to rediscover and reaffirm belief in morality, Kerby. Basic morality has been thrown out the window, and it will be our undoing if we don't recover that.
Let me just mention that this book is one that you can find in your local bookstore. Of course, we also have a link, as we just mentioned a minute ago, to StandStrongMinistries.org. It's published by Broad Street, and there are actually 13 different chapters, and there's a reader discussion guide and all sorts of other resources and appendices, about 200 pages, published by Broad Street. And I just think this would be an outstanding 13-week series in a quarter for your small group, for your Sunday school class, for pastors who want to preach on this. So again, I want to really commend this book to you. But let's, if we can, maybe get into some of that, because one of the chapters talks about how Christianity shaped America's foundation. And whether you look at Christopher Columbus, whether you look at the Pilgrims, whether you look at the Puritans, whether you look at some of the other separatists that came to this country, I think we have to begin, Alex, with this obvious recognition that this was a nation that was founded on Christian principles.
Well, it was. By the way, today is the anniversary of what I think is the oldest parachurch ministry in America. 460-some years ago today, July 19th, Puritan Edward Winslow started the Society for the Evangelization of New England. And, if you look at the Plymouth Colony, the Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact, the Constitutional Convention, just throughout America's history, we were steeped in Christianity. In 1954, in a Time magazine article, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren said that Christianity and the good book, quote unquote, that's the Bible, but he said it had, quote, from the beginning been our guiding genius. And as long as we do not deviate from it, no great harm could come to us, said Earl Warren. Well, we have deviated from it. And in fact, when Jason and I speak at public schools and to young people, I'm talking even Christian young people, they've only heard that the founders were secularists, they were deists, they probably were atheists. Benjamin Franklin said beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy, so party on. They probably were just like us. And see, we've recast not only the founders through the lenses of our own modern relativism, now with case law rather than natural law driving our judiciary, and the Constitution having to be reinterpreted because, quote, it's a living document, we've cast our very political and legal DNA in light of the 21st century, and it really does imperil our freedoms, our democracy.
Sure.
And so the book, Stand Strong America, is a call back to some of the basics that worked for, say, 2 centuries plus.
Very good. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation. Privileged to have both Dr. Alex McFarland with us today, as well as Jason Jimenez. The book is entitled Stand Strong America. It's just one that needs to be on your shelf. It's one that I really think you should be teaching in your Sunday school class or in your church or whatever venue you might have. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more, not only about the founding of America, but the framing of the Constitution, and what about this idea of separation of church and state? We have a lot to cover. We'll do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One pastor in Iowa has accused the government of meddling in religious affairs. Pastor Kerry Gordon is concerned that the Iowa Civil Rights Commission brochure on sexual orientation and gender identity defines churches as public accommodations. Thus, all the sexual orientation anti-discrimination laws may apply to his church and any other church. The brochure has a section entitled, "Does this law apply to churches?" The answer that it gives is sometimes. He goes on to explain that churches are only exempt if the qualifications are related to bona fide religious purpose. Where qualifications are not related to a bona fide religious purpose, churches are still subject to a law's provision, such as a child care facility operated at a church or a church service open to the public. Now, if you think about it, that last sentence opens the door since it describes most of the events a church might hold. The current interpretation would prohibit saying anything in a church that would make a person of a particular gender identity uncomfortable. Pastor Gordon believes the statements in the brochure show a flagrant disregard for the First Amendment of the Constitution and also adds that it's fundamentally wrong, and I can't comply with that. First Liberty Institute is representing the pastor in his church. The law firm fired off a demand letter to the Iowa Civil Rights Commission calling for them to amend its published policy to clarify that it will not apply Iowa Code 216 against churches. This may just be the first step in what will become an important religious liberty lawsuit. All of this brings to mind the famous line by Martin Niemöller. Few pastors have been willing to defend bakers, florists, and photographers. I guess you could put it this way. First they came for the bakers, then they came for the pastors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dr. Alex McFarland as well as Jason Jimenez as we talk about this new book, Stand Strong America, Courage, Freedom, and the Hope for Tomorrow, how it relates so much to even some of the discussions that will be taking place and the debate and presentations at both the Republican Convention and the Democratic Convention. But Jason, let me come to you for just a minute. You've been a pastor, and it seems to me as we talked about this that this would be a way to teach this kind of material inside the church. If indeed we start with the assumption, and I think it's a fair one, that there's a fair amount of biblical illiteracy. There certainly is a fair amount of cultural and historical literacy as well, illiteracy. There are individuals that really don't know about the founding of this country, don't really know how to think about issues about the freedom of religion, maybe don't really understand how America's under attack. I think this would be a good way to teach that. And as a former pastor, what would you say?
Well, yeah, absolutely, Kerby. I mean, that was one of the reasons, just to tell your audience, that when Alex and I were traveling, and of course, like you, we love worldview stuff. We love being engaged in the culture. And as we were talking and traveling and dealing with, we love history. Alex and I, when we're together, we just love to just connect and share and look at this beautiful history. And I always tease Alex because he's a factoid guy. You know, he always comes out with these quotes, and it just inspires the both of us, you know. And, you know, I mean, he's a walking textbook, but, you know, it just was really resonating with us. But to your point, Kerby, I think that's the thing. I left a local church, been blessed pastoring from Arizona to North Carolina, but that's the problem. And I was seeing it more and more that there's just this not even a desire to want to know about the culture and the history and the heritage of Christianity in America. And so one of the reasons years later, I mean, we wrote this book was to offer this as a small group, as a study for pastors to take it, because I get it that a lot of them maybe don't know or too afraid maybe, or when they went through seminary, sadly, they don't really cover some of these issues, and so they kind of feel inadequate. And so there's some issues that we could talk about on a later date about that. But we wanted to give a resource. That's what we are to the church. We want to be instruments of God's righteousness to say, hey, look, you know, here are some truths. We, like you said, we developed it. It's simplistic. It's not heady and long and you know, too thick. It's got review questions, because I really believe, and Alex and I really believe wholeheartedly, Kerby, as you do, we need to get this information back into the church, because, as you just said it in your point of view thing, they went after the bakers and the photographers, and the pastor's like, wow, those are some of our congregation, some of our members, and we're there, we pray for them, we support them. But a lot of them feel like this doesn't really, not necessarily relate to them, but that it wouldn't really happen to them. Because if they really believe that, they would definitely be calling on us a lot more to be coming into their church and equipping their church. And let me say this one last thing. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're working with this conservative organization that is going around doing religious freedom stuff. And we approached several churches to have this rally. Well, it's during a re-election period, obviously. And so all the elders of these churches, they viewed this rally, this religious rally, as an uncomfortable event. And so my take back to them is, you guys can feel as uncomfortable as you want, because at some point they're coming to you guys, and guess how uncomfortable you're going to be feeling then, when you have these gay rights coming, these non-discrimination ordinance laws coming down. And I think a lot of it is because people are culturally illiterate, they're disengaged, they lack the understanding of what this nation was built on, what the Bill of Rights are, and why it matters to them. And so that's why we wrote this book.
Alex, I heard you saying yes, and again, that's another point that we should make, and that is, there was a time in which pastors were preaching from the pulpits the ideas that made their way into the Constitution. You have, for example, some research was done by professors at the University of Houston, and one of my major professors at Georgetown, by the way, was involved in that as well, and they found that most of the quotes from the founders came from the Bible, but more importantly, most of those quotes were actually from the sermons of that day. So it used to be that the pastors were speaking to these issues. Today, pastors feel, as Jason mentioned a minute ago, uncomfortable about even having a political rally.
Oh, yeah, that's very true. But if you look at the American Revolution, it really did begin in the churches. And in fact, in Lexington, the shot heard around the world, the British fired on parishioners leaving a sanctuary. And those were the volleys that started the American Revolution. Why would the British fire on people coming out of a church sanctuary? It's because the ministers of the colonies were preaching. Benjamin Franklin said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And that's why the founders, when they said appealing to God for the rectitude of our intentions, in other words, the ministers and the patriots and George Washington leading the Continental Army, they believed that if they did not respond to the abuses and the immoralities of Great Britain, then they were complicit with it. Wow. Now, I got to tell you this. On July 3rd, it was my privilege to preach at a church, and I preached a sermon on if 2016 had been 1776, would we have an America? And it was straight out of the book, Stand Strong for America. I was basically saying, look, the Founding Fathers believed in moral law. They believed in a moral lawgiver. They believed in a just cause, and they were willing to get involved. So a 20-something young man, a millennial, and Jason and I have a great heart for this demographic. But he asked me, could we meet for coffee, and he wanted to discuss the sermon. I said, sure. So a couple of days later, it was like July 5th or 6th. So this is, only a couple of weeks ago. We met, and he said, I heard you preach. And I said, yeah. He said, I'm a Christian. I said, good. He said, listen, I was horrified at your sermon. I said, did I say something wrong? Horrified? And I said, why? He said, you're a minister, Alex. You are to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you got up there and you talked about the Founding Fathers. And he said, it sounded like you were stumping for the Republican Party. And he said, I was horrified that you, an alleged man of God, would use the pulpit for that. And so, it was a very civil conversation. But I said, look, I was just giving you American history. George Washington said that if the Constitution, which he helped frame, would have hindered the rights of any church or ecclesiastical society, he would never have signed it. And I said, look, I was not trying to turn it into a political rally, but you have to understand, my millennial friend, that your religious freedoms, your right to free religious expression, the social justice that you care so much about, belief in the dignity of every human being. All of the things that you hold dear are pulled straight out of the biblical worldview. And so he asked me, why should I care about politics? And I said, well, you should only care about politics if you care about your future, if you care about the world that you're going to live in tomorrow. Now, I tell this story, Kerby, because what we've got to do as, leaders, I'm 52, I'm older than Jason by about 10 years, but we've got to help the young generation understand that, of course, as Christians, our home is in heaven. Our primary calling is the Great Commission, make disciples, of course. However, so that we can live out the gospel, so that we can preach Jesus and make disciples, we have to retain and even restore the fiber of America that for decades some groups that hate God have been working hard to unravel.
Many of you, of course, get my daily commentary, and if you even go on our website and type in the commentary titled Know America, that one starts out by having me say, Alex McFarland made an attention-getting statement the other day. He said that if today were 1776, there would be no America. His reason was simple. Back in 1776, the Founding Fathers believed in natural law. Today, our leaders do not. So obviously, I'm quoting from you as
people with whom I speak feel like they'll never own a house. I'm talking, these are kids with college degrees and you would think would have good employment prospects, but they don't believe that there is an America that offers them opportunity. And this malaise that we're seeing and the thousands of people we're interviewing, there's just this hopelessness. People are asking, is there any solution? And Jason and I in the book, we say yes. But we've got to be honest and realistic, and we've got to be committed, and we've got to believe that what we say and do can make a difference. It can. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, but Patrick Henry said that America was built not on religion and not by religionists, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ and by Christians. And so the Malaise Index reveals that there's a lot of hopelessness, and I would invite people to go to the website, take the survey. Let me hear from you. We really want to know where people's heart and mind are. But Jason and I are saying, no, there's hope, because God is the God that can not only save souls and restore lives, he can restore a nation, but we've got to turn back to him. And so it's our joy to begin we turned ourselves to God. We've prayed. We've asked God to cleanse and equip and use us. And we believe there's hope, but we've got to be honest and be forthright before God and turn to it.
And again, we have that link to alexmcfarland.com, and you can just go to alexmcfarland.com/survey to find that survey. And just before we run out of time, Jason, let's talk about what's available at the website standstrongministries.org, because there are some great resources that would be available to anybody if they wanted to do an individual study. But again, as I said at the outset, I think pastors, Sunday school leaders, and others can develop this into a 13-week series. You have discussion questions and all sorts of other materials. So what will they be able to find when they land on your website?
Well, like you said, Kerby, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for what you do. Alex and I are so blessed.
Yeah.
We do pray daily for our country. We pray, and we thank you for the opportunity, because you're right, this is a great resource for the church. So if they go to alexmcfarland.com, they go to standstrongministries.com, like you said, local bookstores, please, we encourage your listeners, get Stand Strong America, because we want to leave you with three final thoughts if you think about it, Kerby. Despite ISIS, despite these growing threats, despite these terrorist attacks and the growing national debt that we're experiencing right now, and who's going to win in November, and what does America look like in 4 years, we need to discover hope, especially as Christians, because we are not hopeless, we are hopeful. And number two is, whatever's going on in our life, we encourage people in the book to refocus their priorities. We got to get our priorities realigned to God. And finally, number three, we need to be a model of courage. And so there's tons of resources they can find. There's other books that Alex and I have written that they can get their hands on. But we are right now encouraging people, especially coming this election right now, we need evangelicals to show up and vote, and we need more churches and more pastors who are willing to take a book like Stand Strong America and put it through their small group studies with teens, college-age students, adults, moms and dads. We encourage everybody, get Stand Strong America, because Alex and I spent time in prayer and writing and researching. And this book, even as Kerby, as we're going through this, has emboldened us even more to be a champion of God's truth in America. And we need this message.
Again, it's so well done. Again, you have a very good diagnosis as well as a good prescription. And Alex and Jason, we're just out of time. But again, let's do this again because I want people to be aware of this. The book is entitled Stand Strong America. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we have links to both alexmcfarland.com as well as Stand Strong America. And that is standstrongministries.org, pointofview.net. So guys, thank you both for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thank you, brother.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to, first of all, open up the phones. Some of you may have some comments or questions. I didn't want to take any time away from these two excellent, articulate individuals, but if you'd like to make some comments, 1-800-351-1212. We're also going to have a chance to hear from some of the comments made last night, some of the speeches. We'll hear from Sheriff David Clark, for example, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and we'll talk about Melania Trump, too, because that's in the news, so lots to cover, and we will do that, and it will be in the second hour. But especially, I want to open up the phones and make this next hour an open line. If something we've talked about in this hour is something you'd like to address, you are free to do so. If there was something you heard last night or read about at the Republican convention, that's an opportunity for you to join the conversation as well. 1-800-351-1212. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we'll be talking about, either have been talking about or will be talking about in the second hour, visit our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. Let's get a chance to give you a platform so that you can articulate your concerns. The program's called Point of View. We want to hear your point of view. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, we spent some time talking with Jason Jimenez and Alex McFarland about their new book, Stand Strong America, Courage, Freedom, and Hope for Tomorrow. If you'd like to join us on that topic, 1-800-351-1212. But also, we're going to be getting into some of the speeches given last night at the Republican National Convention. Let me take a phone call that is related to our topic last hour. We'll go first to North Carolina. And John, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes. Just had a question. Maybe you can give me some suggestions. I wanted to register people to vote. And so I thought maybe, a good way to do that would be to go out to the lobby of my church, in the lobby, and just as folks came by to say, look, if you registered to vote, and just give them the form, they fill out and mail it and send it in. So I decided to go to the assistant pastor, and they said, all right, to do this. And he said, well, I'll check. And, of course, he came back and said, well, it's against our policy to talk about politics, and you can't register. And so we was, so it was discouraging, to say the least. And
Sure.
So I just wondered what would be a good way to talk to convince the pastor, or...
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. I can see how they might say, well, just registering to people to vote is too political now. In my church, we do that. Okay, and I understand it. And frankly, there are at least one state, I think state of Florida, you cannot register people to vote on Sunday, which I think was done to really prevent churches from doing that. But nevertheless, the bottom line is, one maybe you could go back to as a second idea is to say, well, could we then at least mention in the bulletin that if you aren't registered to vote, it would be a good thing to be registered to vote. And we're going to have on our own website, pointofview.net, like we've done before, how people can go online and see if they're registered to vote, and then how they can actually register to vote online. So a lot of it's being done electronically now anyway. So
I see.
The other idea is, of course, you probably have voter registration cards there in North Carolina, and so you could hand those out to people and say, well, okay, if we can't register to vote, could we at least give them a voter registration card and let them make the decision?
Right.
I don't think anybody would say there would be a problem with you going to your friends and saying, anybody not registered to vote, I got some cards here, I can hand one to you real quickly and make it real easy for you to do so.
Okay.
Those are just a couple of quick ideas. But again, more and more what we will have, and we haven't put it up yet because we're kind of in the middle of the two conventions, but if you were watching during this spring, first winter, spring, we actually put a section up, and we'll put it up there again so that people can actually go online to determine whether or not they're registered to vote. Because some people move and they realize they're not registered to vote. And then also we have a section where they can click on it and go and register online. And it would just links you, of course, to the various states where you do that online. And I would just encourage you to do all you can, because the sad reality is a lot of churches have a lot of members of their congregation that aren't even registered to vote.
Yeah.
Okay. So
okay, well, I appreciate the information now. I'll see if I can, should I go back to the pastor and just...
Yeah, I'd say, well, could we at least put an announcement in the bulletin if somebody would like to register to vote? There are materials available, or they can register online, or, it's important to do this, your civic duty, something like that, and see how he responds to that.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, appreciate you calling, and thanks for listening. I think you were listening online, and I might just mention that, of course, most of you probably listen on the radio, but we certainly have a number of people that listen to the program online or listen to it later on a podcast or something. We're going to get to the Republican convention, but let me take at least one more phone call, and this one comes from South Carolina. Bruce, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I appreciate you so. I'm a first-time listener. I'm traveling through on my way to Massachusetts.
Well, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I have a question. How long will the United States allow political beings to get away with crime? Going back as far as Kennedy.
Yeah, and again, I'm only getting part of that. I know you're traveling right now, so how much will will America allow what?
Politicians to get away with major crime.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sadly, that's happened. I think you're thinking of Hillary Clinton, aren't you?
Well, the cover-ups go back as far as I remember, as far as Kennedy.
Well, and again, this is why I think it is important, as we sort of were alluding to even in the first hour, to have individuals of integrity. We have a Justice Department that I feel has not done the kinds of things that Justice Departments in the past have done. And that is that whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, and you were an attorney general from one administration or another, you are supposed to fairly adjudicate various laws and policies. And that has certainly not happened over the last 7.5 years. And the last time we had a crisis like that, I think you can begin to think about what happened in the 1970s, where you had Richard Nixon trying to manipulate some of that, and you actually had members of the Justice Department leave, and then you had others that were fired in the so-called Saturday Night Massacre. So whether it was Richard Nixon or now President Obama, so President Nixon, President Obama, certainly we have that same kind of problem. And again, I just wonder if we now are talking about Hillary Clinton, we can get into those issues as well. So again, I don't have a quick answer for that question, but for some reason, we certainly do not have a fair dealing with justice issues. And I can just, like a lot of people, shake my head at the fact that you have the FBI director, James Comey, begin to set forth all the abuses that Hillary Clinton was accused of in terms of the email server and this scandal, and then say, but we're not going to recommend an indictment. And anyone else doing that, as a matter of fact, he essentially said that, anyone else doing this probably would be treated differently. And part of it is because, well, we don't want to prejudice this campaign or this election. But I just think until we get to a point where everybody is treated fairly under the law and there is equal opportunity, not only for being proven innocent, but an equal opportunity for people to be proven guilty, despite your status, despite your financial set of circumstances, I think we are in the wrong direction as a country. Let's, if we can, take one more phone call real quickly, because I think Linda in Georgia has an idea as well about registering people to vote. So, Linda, go ahead with your idea.
Hi, yes, I wanted to mention in regard to voting in the church, one suggestion I might have is, I think, very benign and could fall within the confines of the church, is to just ask to make an announcement in regard to leaving your number for contact if anybody needed a ride to the voting polls.
Sure.
I mean, that's very benign, and yet it puts the opportunity out there and reminds people about voting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Just to say, mention that if anybody would need a ride to the polls, you would make yourself available. And then it reminds some people to go, oh, yeah, well, am I registered to vote? I need to find out about that. So that would be a very good idea as well. So if John is listening, Linda has an idea that maybe you could make some announcements about that. And I think just a general announcement, even in a church that says we're going to be apolitical, there's nothing political about saying, look, as a good citizen and a good steward of the vote which God has given to you, it seems to me that we should all be registered to vote. And if you have not registered to vote, there are individuals in the church who'd be glad to help you. Or else, here's a place, website you can go to register to vote. Let's come back, though, and we want to talk a little bit about what happened in the Republican convention. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one pastor in Iowa has accused the government of meddling in religious affairs. Pastor Kerry Gordon is concerned that the Iowa Civil Rights Commission brochure on sexual orientation and gender identity defines churches as public accommodations. Thus, all the sexual orientation anti-discrimination laws may apply to his church and any other church. The brochure has a section entitled, "Does this law apply to churches?" The answer that it gives is sometimes. He goes on to explain that churches are only exempt if the qualifications are related to bona fide religious purpose. Where qualifications are not related to a bona fide religious purpose, churches are still subject to a law's provision, such as a child care facility operated at a church or a church service open to the public. Now, if you think about it, that last sentence opens the door since it describes most of the events a church might hold. The current interpretation would prohibit saying anything in a church that would make a person of a particular gender identity uncomfortable. Pastor Gordon believes the statements in the brochure show a flagrant disregard for the First Amendment of the Constitution and also adds that it's fundamentally wrong and I can't comply with that. First Liberty Institute is representing the pastor and his church. The law firm fired off a demand letter to the Iowa Civil Rights Commission calling for them to amend its published policy to clarify that it will not apply Iowa Code 216 against churches. This may just be the first step in what will become an important religious liberty lawsuit. All of this brings to mind the famous line by Martin Niemöller. Few pastors have been willing to defend bakers, florists, and photographers. I guess you could put it this way. First they came for the bakers, then they came for the pastors. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's begin to talk about the Republican National Convention that took place last night. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Theme last night was Let's Make America Safe Again. And so the focus was largely on some of the speakers that would address either safety inside the country, and that certainly was the topic of Sheriff David Clark. And by the way, he's the sheriff of Milwaukee County, and an individual that has been very highly visible as an African-American sheriff. His father was a paratrooper, and actually he's David A. Clark Jr., and he's named after his father. Tonight, of course, is going to be Make America Work Again, and you're going to have a chance to hear from Donald Trump Jr., you're going to hear from Paul Ryan, you're going to hear from Ben Carson, Chris Christie, Kevin McCarthy, to mention just a few of individuals. And so this is kind of an attempt each night to have a different theme. Monday was Make America Safe Again. Tuesday, Make America Work Again. Wednesday, Make America First Again. And then finally, Thursday, Make America One Again. And each theme is something that is done at a lot of conventions. We'll probably see something very similar to that in the Democratic Convention. Let's go first to Sheriff David Clark. He didn't waste any time when he got in front of the audience there to begin to focus on the fact that blue lives matter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make something very clear. Blue lives matter in America. I stand before you tonight with a heavy heart as the law enforcement community prepares to bury three of Baton Rouge, Louisiana's finest. But there is some good news out of Baltimore, Maryland, as Lieutenant Brian Rice was acquitted on all charges. In the malicious prosecution of activist State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby.
And so, again, just a little bit of some of the message that he brought last night. And, of course, he's mixed it up quite often with some of the other broadcasters, as he has been somebody who is certainly, as you would imagine, as a sheriff, supporting those in law enforcement, and has been very critical of those who, in the case he mentioned of the Maryland State Attorney, Marilyn Mosby, have brought what he thought were charges that either were inappropriate or overdrawn. And, of course, as you begin to see how each one of those has been set aside, either by, in this case, a judge, or in other cases, in one case by a hung jury, you can see that either they drew up too many charges or maybe they weren't appropriate in the first place. So anyway, Sheriff David Clark, I thought I'd give you one more from David Clark, and that is the fact that he is convinced that Americans do not feel safe in their homes.
We simply cannot be great if we do not feel safe in our homes, on our streets, and in our schools. I see this every day at street level, where many Americans increasingly have an uneasiness about the ability of their families to live safely in these troubling times. This transcends race, religion, ethnicity, gender, age, and lifestyle.
So again, some of the comments from Sheriff David Clark. If you're looking for some facts and figures, one of the things I did was put those together in a commentary that came out yesterday entitled Police Shooting Statistics. And one of the reasons I did it is because we see all these news stories right now filled with all sorts of statistics about police shootings, and I think it's important to recognize that sometimes they seem contradictory. And if you're like me, sometimes you watch these talking head shows and somebody will say this and somebody will say that, and you go, okay, I don't even know who to believe anymore. So my attempt for a few minutes was to try to kind of summarize all of that in the commentary. And I thought I'd read it real quickly, and then we'll get on to Mayor Rudy Giuliani. But I point out that, first of all, let's talk about a statistical disparity that is used so often, and that is the fact that, yes, it is quite true that if you look at the percentage of Americans in the United States and look at the African Americans compared to Americans in general, that is a 13%. So about 13% of the American population are African American. But 26% of the people that have been killed by police are African American. So that looks like a disparity, and that's the number that you hear so often, and we'll hear a lot even next week at the Democratic National Convention. It's something that is quoted quite often by political candidates, by Black Lives Matter. And so if you just look at that number at all and don't look at anything else, you say, well, that shows some kind of disparity between 13% of the general population, but 26% of the individuals that are killed by police are black. So that's where I think you have to dig into a few other statistics. And one of those comes, of course, from Heather McDonald. She's been on the program with us before. Her new book, War on Cops, reminds us that if you actually look at the Bureau of Justice statistics, that is that African Americans, especially in some of these inner city areas, are responsible for a very high percentage of various crimes and also assaults against police. For example, the Bureau of Justice Statistics found that blacks were charged with 57% of murders and 45% of assaults, especially when you look at the largest U.S. counties, which again are some of those places where this takes place. Then the other statistic she looks at is the statistic known as cop killers. These are men, and there are a few women, but all, very, very few. It's almost all exclusively men who present a lethal threat to the police. These are ones that actually charge the police, have a gun drawn, have a knife, whatever. And according to FBI data, 43% of the cop killers are black. So when you start looking at that, you begin to see that, of course, there is a difference between, say, 13% of the population, but 43% of those who are cop killers are black. And she also goes on to point out that law enforcement officers are killed by African Americans, by black men, at a rate 2.5 times higher than the rate at which blacks are killed by police. So it really shows that cop killer statistic. Now, if you go to my commentary yesterday, one of the things that Shamila did was put a picture up of Dr. Roland Fryer. He's an African-American professor at Harvard University. Matter of fact, one of the, I think, youngest professors, if I remember right, to ever gain tenure. Just a very brilliant man. And he had said, because he's an African-American, he was really angry after the deaths of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. And so he decided to do what he could do. He says, I'm not much on protesting, but I am good at collecting data. So he decided to collect data to understand what was happening in the streets of America. And his research team collected data for 1,300 different shootings. And I've had some people say, well, that's a small sample. Well, it's a pretty good sample. 1,300 shootings, that's fairly accurate. And what he found was this. They found no evidence of a racial bias when it came to the use of lethal force. Matter of fact, if he found anything, interestingly enough, he found that blacks were slightly less likely to be killed. And so Professor Roland Fryer admitted that this conclusion is, quote, the most surprising result of my career, unquote. For example, he looked at a number of different cities. I'll just pick one in my column that I mentioned, and that is that when you look at the issue of shoot, don't shoot, he found that officers in Houston were about 20% less likely to shoot suspects if the suspect was black. Interestingly enough, I think that shows what many people, including Heather McDonald, have referred to as the Ferguson effect. That is, if I shoot this individual, will it just unfold like it did with the death of Michael Brown? So at least Roland Fryer did recognize that when it came to the use of lethal force, he found that, interestingly enough, if anything, the evidence was they were less likely to shoot. On the other hand, and this is one that goes the other direction, he did find that when you talked about non-lethal force, throwing them on the ground, having them spread equal on the hood of a car, whatever, that he did recognize or did feel that he could actually identify a bias there. But nevertheless, those are just a couple of facts. And of course, some of that surfaced last night as you heard the speech by Sheriff David Clark. Let's take a break. And first of all, we'll take some phone calls if you'd like to join us on this issue, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, we're going to hear from Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Mayor of New York, individual that certainly used his own experience in cleaning up the city of New York and making the argument that this is something that indeed Donald Trump would do, but then got into the issue of Islamic extremist terrorism, and we're going to talk about that. And then we'll finish up with some of the controversy surrounding the speech, obviously, by Melania Trump, which has been in the news as well. But if you'd like to join our conversation today, perhaps you had a chance to hear some of the speeches last night or notice some things when you were watching the Republican convention, feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and hear from Rudy Giuliani, and then we'll hear from you. So take the time to give us a call, and we'll take those phone calls right after these important messages.
There is a big incentive to pay your electric bill. If you don't, you find yourself in the dark. But who pays to make sure you're educated on the key issues of the day, to bring you wisdom for life at work, at home, and in the culture, like you hear from guests here on Point of View? Who makes sure that our electric bill gets paid? You're way ahead of me, aren't you? That's right. You do. The truth is, if every listener this week gave just $5, we could pay our bills for about the next 3 years. Did you hear me? $5, 3 years. Now, perhaps you can give more. How about $50 or $500, maybe even more? But please, don't be the one who fails to send at least $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Whatever amount you chip in, thank you for your gift. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As I mentioned before, last night was Make America Safe Again. Tonight, Make America Work Again. Wednesday, Make America First Again. Thursday, Make America One Again. Tomorrow, we're going to spend some time in the first hour talking about education, a kind of a view about Christian education maybe you've not had a chance to hear before. So we'll be talking with Tracy Eckert about that. Second hour, we have Thomas DiLorenzo in I guess by phone. In that particular case, we'll be talking about the problem with socialism. And along the way, we'll see if we can drop in a little bit more from some of the speeches given tonight. But let's see if we can go back to last night, and that is Mayor Rudy Giuliani. First of all, had some things to say about the police and how when they come to save you, they don't ask whether you're black or white.
I'm here to speak to you about a very serious subject: how to make America safe. The vast majority of Americans today do not feel safe. They fear for their children. They fear for themselves. They fear for our police officers who are being targeted with a target on their back. We pray for our police officers in Dallas and Baton Rouge and their families. And we say thank you to the Cleveland Police Department for protecting us. Thank you. We know the risk you're taking. And we say thank you to every police officer and law enforcement agent who's out tonight protecting us, black, white, Latino, of every race, every color, every creed, every sexual orientation. When they come to save your life, they don't ask if you are black or white. They just come to save you.
Enthusiastic fellow. Let me just explain. We were talking about this off air. You know, sometimes it almost is too much on television because the nature is television is sort of a cold medium. So you're used to people kind of talking back and forth. Not that we always see that on the talking head shows. And in a convention, it's full of enthusiasm. And the other thing is you almost have to project even to get the words out. I've been to a couple of these conventions. One time, because I was a newspaper columnist at the time, I was actually up sitting where they were. And I had a real appreciation to the fact you really just have to almost over-enunciate, over-emote just for people on the floor who are sometimes almost 10 feet below you and further away from you to get any kind of dynamic going. And so in some respects, you might say it seemed like it was too much. At the same time, it certainly revved up the convention. Of course, these conventions are all about pathos and emotion, and of course, some of that was happening as well. And when they talked about protecting you, the Cleveland police, we need to maybe put this video up because they went out and started interviewing some of the protesters. The one that still cracks me up is this guy. He's got a sign that says "Trump hates kittens," and they do a whole interview with this guy. So not everybody in the protest lines are all that dangerous. Some of them, you're not even sure they are quite with it. One guy in particular, I'm sure he's at least one taco short of a combination plate. But nevertheless, they're out there, and you never know who's going to do something crazy. So that's, again, why they wanted to thank the Cleveland police. But you look at some of those protesters, and there is a tendency for all of us to say, really? But nevertheless, let's get on. Rudy Giuliani also wanted to spend some time talking about something else. And in a sense, he was quoting intentionally from a speech given many years ago by Barack Obama in terms of this idea that we were supposed to have one America.
It's time to make America safe again. It's time to make America one again. One America! What happened happened to? What happened to? There's no black America. There's no white America. There is just America. What happened to it? Where did it go? How was it flown away?
Again, talking about, obviously alluding to the speech given by, at that time, Senator Barack Obama about there's just one America. And so I thought it was a way to get across the idea that we, in some respects, seem more divided racially than we ever have been before. And one last one, and that was, again, another knock on the current president, the inability that this president, and up until recently, the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, just could not bring themselves to say the words Islamic extremist terrorist.
In the last 7 months, there have been 5 major Islamic terrorist attacks on us and our allies. We must not be afraid to define our enemy. It is Islamic extremist terrorism. For the purposes of the media, I did not say all of Islam. I did not say most of Islam. I said Islamic extremist terrorism. You know who you are. And we're coming to get you.
And we're coming to get you. So again, those just, this is what you call a red meat speech, and there were quite a number of those last night, and there will be some at the Democratic Convention as well. So if you'd like to join our conversation, as we've talked a little bit about the issue of safety at home and what is oftentimes identified as the war on cops, and then also, of course, the whole issue of terrorism and how we fight terrorism. Those are a few issues we wanted to put on the table, but just before we take some of those phone calls and before we take a break, let's go to Melania Trump. Now, after she gave her speech, everybody gave her high marks, but it didn't take long for people to say, wait a minute, some of the things she said sounded awful familiar. Yeah, not just a little bit familiar, almost word for word in about a 45-second section there from the speech given by Michelle Obama in 2008. And I was originally not even going to play those clips, but last night I thought, well, we ought to at least have one from her. Well, it turns out the one I picked was the one where it's not just kind of a phrase for phrase similarity or even a thought for thought similarity. There's virtually a word for word parallelism. And of course, there have been all sorts of questions about the issue of plagiarism. But let's first of all hear what Melania Trump had to say about her own personal background.
I was born in Slovenia, a small, beautiful, and then communist country in Central Europe. My sister Ines, who is an incredible woman and a friend, and I were raised by my wonderful parents. My elegant and hard-working mother, Amalia, introduced me to fashion and beauty. My father, Victor, installed in me a passion for business and travel. Their integrity, compassion, and intelligence reflects to this day on me and for my love of family and America. From a young age, my parents impressed on me the values that you work hard for what you want in life, that your word is your bond, and you do what you say and keep your promise, that you treat people with respect. They taught and showed me values and morals in their daily life. That is a lesson that I continue to pass along to our son. And we need to pass those lessons on to the many generations to follow.
So again, just a little bit of some of the comments there. And on the one hand, you can honestly say that she probably does believe and probably did learn that your word is your bond, but the phraseology is just one for one. And you probably by now, if you haven't listened to other talk shows or television programs, have probably seen the side-by-side comparison. And a lot of people just simply say, okay, was this an attempt to embarrass her? I doubt it. But was it an attempt by somebody who obviously was helping her write the speech? I mean, after all, you got to recognize she was born in Slovenia. English is not her first language. The last thing she wants to do is have some kind of big grammatical error, and so obviously somebody's helping to craft the speech for her. There's no doubt about that. Some individuals speak without a teleprompter, but that's not one she's going to be doing. This was the one opportunity for, and the only opportunity for her probably to speak in front of such a large audience. But you just can't get away from the fact that it is just word for word some of the things that Michelle Obama said back in 2008. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lots to talk about today, and we only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to move my way through the calls as quickly as we can, and still room for you if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Kentucky first, WYGE. Dale, thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
Yeah, you are on the air.
I'd like to point out a huge difference between Melania Trump and Michelle Obama. Melania Trump talked about how she was so, I think the word she used was proud, though I don't remember, to become an American citizen in 2006. Michelle Obama, at some point, I don't remember exactly when, but in 2008 it must have been, said that for the first time she was proud to be an American or proud of America.
What a difference.
As if she had been ashamed of America before.
Yes, and again, you look at her thesis in college, you get the sense that was the case. You know, and there is a sense in which, if indeed this had been borrowed from her speech, and it may have been, I don't see how it couldn't have been, you could have turned it the other way. It was a missed opportunity. You know, it could have been Melania Trump could have said, you know, let's just say 8 years ago, we heard Michelle Obama say, you know, your word is your bond, and, you know, all those kinds of things. And then she could have just said, you know, she said it, but I believe it. And, or I live it, you know, because there is a sense in which if you go back and compare what Michelle Obama said in 2008 and the way in which she and her husband have sometimes lived, there's a discontinuity. That's being charitable, I think. So that would have been one way to do it. But I think you pointed out another one, and that is the difference between potential First Lady saying, this is the first time I've been proud to be an American, and Melania having to go through the process of naturalization, as anybody that wants to be a citizen has to do, and at the end, proud to be an American. You know, I do see a difference.
And I bet she didn't come in illegally either.
Yeah, no, she didn't. Okay, well, anyway, I appreciate you starting us off there, Dale. Thank you. Let me see if I can get a few more phone calls here. We'll head to South Carolina this time. And Tom, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Hey, good afternoon. No, just a question. I heard you say something about Giuliani's speech. There was some comparisons between something that Obama had said. Could you clarify that for me?
No, well, what I meant is that there was a real similarity between Melania's speech and Michelle Obama's speech. I don't know that I see any real comparison other than I see what you're getting at. That very first quote is where he talked about one America. And so that's really, he was intentionally quoting from the idea of the Democratic Convention speech 4 years earlier, in which he talked about being one America. So I see where you're going, and that is when he talked about there's no black America, there's no white America, there's one America. And so Rudy Giuliani at that point was saying, where did that go? In other words, we thought that when we elected Barack Obama, the first black president, that racial tension would subside and we would no longer have black America and white America, and we would have one America. So I guess I said it so quickly I didn't explain it. So thank you for bringing that up. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'm listening to you on the road down 95.
Well, I certainly have driven up and down 95 many a time. So thank you so very much for clarifying that. Now I figured out what your question was. So that's a very good one as well. Let's go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Henry, thank you for calling today.
Hi there. I was just wanted to comment. I was watching Michelle Obama's speech that they were rebroadcasting the whole thing on C-SPAN this afternoon, and I think it's probably pretty unfair to accuse Melania of plagiarism. What we're really talking about is two very tiny snippets of speeches that moved in entirely different directions.
Right.
And in terms of this phrase, your word is your bond, I mean, how many times have we heard that? Maybe
sure. We use that all the time.
You know?
Yeah.
That's an American way of talking.
And so, again, you know, I've said, some people have said it was like 45 seconds out of her speech that lasted for a couple of minutes, or, you know, 5 sentences, whatever. It's not good, but I'm just saying that I've never really criticized individuals. I mean, after all, remember, Vice President Joe Biden back in 1987 was accused of plagiarizing a speech by Neil Kinnock, and so he actually dropped out of the presidential campaign. Barack Obama in 2008, he was accused of lifting a speech from, at that time, the Massachusetts Governor Patrick, and then there were even, and then he was real flippant about it and said, well, you know, Deval Patrick and I, we kind of share back and forth, and after all, I've noticed sometimes Hillary Clinton uses some of my words. I take plagiarism seriously when you talk about academics and when you write an article and when you are especially doing a thesis and a dissertation, and there are all sorts of sad examples of that, of Vladimir Putin and individuals. Matter of fact, the German Defense Secretary, the CNN talks about, the Hungarian president, some of these people that got their PhDs. It turns out later on they had plagiarized whole sections of it. Well, that's a big issue. But when you speak, sometimes you borrow phrases or turns of phrases, and I try as much as I possibly can to always give credit where I got that idea, simply so that I avoid anybody even being able to get away with saying it's plagiarism. But Henry, I do think this is a pretty small event, especially since we're talking about the First Lady. We're not talking about the next president of the United States. So I sort of agree with you. But I'll give you a final thought. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate your show, and I just wanted to raise that issue. I don't think the way CNN led the thing is you would have thought that this was Benghazi, but in fact, it really was a tiny little snippet more of it. Appeared to me to be a make news sort of thing than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I'm not exactly sure how it happened, although I know that sometimes when people are writing speeches, they'll look at other speeches and they'll copy and paste and put things together and say, okay, we need to say something like that, but then they forget that they got it from somewhere else. And that's the trouble, especially when you do it electronically. But the sad reality of all of this is some great speeches last night. I mentioned, of course, David Clark, and we had a chance to hear Rudy Giuliani, and I go through a long list of individuals that spoke last night. And today, because of this, it allows the individuals, the late night talk shows, they're all going to just lampoon this and have so much fun with this for quite some time. And it really diminishes the possible impact of some great messages that were given last night. So in that respect, I feel sad about it. And number two, I think it's going to be even less likely that you're going to hear Melania Trump out there on the stump speaking very often, because the one opportunity she's had to kind of be presented to the nation, now she's being tarred and feathered with the word plagiarism. So those are the sad parts about this. But in terms of this, I have watched this over the years, and if we're going to hold her to that standard, then maybe we need to go back to 2008 when first of all, Barack Obama, but even some people have said Ben Carson, his book, doesn't have all the right footnotes. Or we go all the way back to Joe Biden when he dropped out as the presidential race because of some of this. I think that's an overreaction. And if nothing else, speeches are important, and they should be properly footnoted as best as possible, and credit should be given where credit is due. But at the same time, I don't put this in the same category, even though it's all called intellectual property. I don't really consider a speech by a first lady on any platform quite the same as a PhD dissertation. But again, this will haunt her for a while, and it really took away from some of the excitement, I think, that was generated last night at the Republican convention. Well, tonight we'll look at Make America Work Again. We'll be following the Republican convention this week, and then, of course, next week we'll be looking at the Democratic convention. And if you want to join us at any point, feel free to give us a call. Let me, again, encourage you to visit the website, find out more about this new book, Stand Strong America. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. I'll see you back here on Wednesday.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.